So, all right, before we start, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of Artwork Archive. If you're not familiar with us, and if you are, then of course, welcome back. So Artwork Archive is an online art inventory management platform based in Denver, Colorado. We work with artists, collectors, and collecting institutions all over the world to help them organize, manage, share, and showcase their art. My personal role at Artwork Archive is twofold. I work with the collectors as their company liaison. And then I'm also the art market editor. So I write articles and conduct interviews with industry experts that you can read on the Artwork Archive blog, especially if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get it every week in your inbox. And so these articles are meant to help collectors, gallerists, advisors, artists, anyone in the industry better navigate the art market. Artwork Archive is a digital platform, however, that goes above and beyond the normal artwork database. Our software is used by collectors and institutions in over 160 countries, and we've been in business for over 10 years. We are a cloud-based software platform, which means you can access your inventory from anywhere through your smartphone, desktop, tablet, or a laptop. Artwork Archive is sort of like having your very own virtual registrar or collection manager. And we allow you to create collections of your artwork, publish those to the web, password protected if you like. You can share private viewing rooms with your network, organize all your important artwork provenance documents, which, as we'll find out, is critical for estate planning. And so my own background is predominantly in the gallery sector. I've worked as an art dealer and managed galleries in New York City, Aspen, and Berlin. So I've been selling art on both the primary and secondary markets for about 15 years. And I just want to point out that estate planning is a very important topic today as we approach or are in the midst of the great wealth transfer in which millennials and Gen Z are going to be inheriting about $30 trillion worth of assets and wealth from our elder generations. I can also speak from personal experience that when you are grieving the loss of a loved one or a terminal prognosis, heaven forbid, this is the worst time to try to organize your estate. Emotions are running high. The 11th hour is definitely not when you want to start thinking about these subjects. All of this needs to be done in advance so that families aren't rushing at the very last moment. And with that being said, I'm going to introduce my esteemed expert today, Melissa Passman, and turn the presentation over to her. So Melissa Passman is an attorney with Pitney, specializing in estate planning and tax-related matters. She earned her JD from UCLA and her LLM in taxation from NYU. Melissa counsels clients on matters around the acquisition, ownership, and disposition of artwork, including the formation of private museums and other charitable vehicles, as well as multi-jurisdictional tax planning. And she is a member of the bar in both California and New York State. So a little bit of background, Melissa and I and Anita Ragusa, who's joining us virtually, all worked at Gagosian Gallery in New York many lifetimes ago. I then went into tech, Melissa went into law, but we are delighted that our paths have converged so that we can team up for this webinar. Melissa is going to talk you through the important things to consider when estate planning with an art collection, what forms and documents are needed, and the critical details to hash out prior to death. I would also like to point out that if you were lucky enough to visit the Whitney Biennial this year, Melissa got nonprofit status for Cassandra Press, which had an entire floor in the Whitney Biennial. So bravo, Melissa. And after Melissa has gone through her topics, I will conduct a brief demonstration of Artwork Archive to show you how the platform empowers collectors and their heirs to take control of their estate and take the guesswork out of estate planning. So with that, Melissa, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Emily, and I'm happy to see some familiar faces here today as well, and thanks to Artwork Archive for hosting. So as Emily mentioned, this is intended to be, kind of an intro to estate planning and also focused on what it means to be estate planning when you have an art collection. So I will go through generally some of the estate planning basics regardless, and then special considerations that you might want to have, when thinking about artwork. I would also note, starting out, there are all kinds of estates with different asset values. In the US, there is an estate tax and a gift tax and a generation skipping transfer tax that do apply. Those thresholds are very high. That currently is at around $12 million a person right now, $24 million for a married couple. And that means that if your estate exceeds those threshold amounts when combined with your lifetime giving, then you will be thinking about federal taxes. Some states like New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts do have their own estate taxes as well. Actually, Connecticut, I think, is the only state that has a gift tax in addition to that. But other states like California do not have any estate tax. So I just want to keep that in the background, as some documents are more relevant when we're talking about taxable estates. So when I say taxable estates, going forward, that is what I will be referring to. So first, just to address the very initial question of who needs an estate plan, the answer to that is really everyone. Regardless of what happens, with your planning otherwise, you are going to have your property distributed one way or another. And if you do have an estate plan, at least that provides the control that you would want, and making sure that artwork will end up in the hands that you want them to end up in, especially when thinking about who has the ability to care for the artwork properly, who will know what to do with it otherwise, whether there's a charitable beneficiary involved. So it's very important, if control is what your goal is, then you absolutely need an estate plan. If you don't have an estate plan, there is something called intestate distribution. So this means that default laws apply, and property will be distributed equally, depending on what your family status is at that time, whether you have a spouse or children, or otherwise going to nearest descendants. So that just is hopefully a good premise for where we're going next. So once you take the step to decide to have an estate plan, one of the most important things you're going to have to do is choose who your beneficiaries will be. So that can be anybody. You can think about whether it's your children or other descendants or family members. You will think about whether certain artwork or other property would end up in trusts, create an LLC, some other form to manage it, depending on what your goals might be. Another recipient, can be a charitable institution. When thinking about charitable institutions, there's a whole range. These would be tax exempt under 501c3 nonprofit organizations. If you are in a taxable estate situation, there's usually charitable planning that occurs to decrease the amount of artwork or other property that is in the estate, and to get that value out. When you make a gift in your will or trust to a charitable institution, it counts as a deduction against the value of your estate. And I should note also, when thinking about charitable giving, there are two different standards that apply. We have our income tax system, which I think most people are familiar with, and that's what you're dealing with regularly. So there are certain rules on charitable deductions in the income tax system, specifically delineating between whether something is a public charity or a private foundation, and it also delineates between whether it is domestic or international. So in income tax planning, you would want to maximize your income tax deduction by donating to a domestic public charity or a domestic private operating foundation. Those have specific meanings in the tax code. That could be the subject of an entirely different talk, but that's a basic consideration. On the estate tax side, there isn't that distinction. So you will find that people will donate, if they have formed a family foundation, they may name the family foundation as a beneficiary. You can name a foreign organization. So those different distinctions don't matter when we're talking about estate tax. With everything here, advanced conversations are key. You really want to make sure that each person or recipient institution understands what it is that they will be dealing with, what they will be receiving, and more on that in a little bit. So just to go through when should collectors start thinking about estate planning, the answer is, as Emilie pointed out, it really is never too early. You don't want to find yourself making last minute decisions, especially if there are institutions involved or if the art collection is more complex. When it comes to museum donations, it's really essential to develop a relationship with that institution beforehand. I've seen in many instances where collectors will name a local institution as a beneficiary of all of their collection, but they never had any discussion. And that results in a lot of problems and work for the people who are left behind to sort of clean things up and figure out what was intended, what another suitable institution might be if the named institution is not willing to accept the work or all of the work, and it extends the timeline for having to manage any kind of estate. So with any kind of institution, usually there's board approval involved. There might be other questions around display, depending on the importance of the artwork. There will be more room for negotiation about whether that artwork can ever be deaccessioned. If you've ever been to the Art Institute of Chicago, I think that's a great example of a place where the kind of power of the collector is on full view, where they have the room within the wing devoted to mostly surrealist works with on all of these amazing Joseph Cornell boxes. And because of the negotiating power of those particular collectors, they were able to get a dedicated space to that work for permanent display. So if there are any kinds of conditions on the work, those all take time, for approval. As a museum is a nonprofit institution, there are multiple layers of approval that do have to occur. And also, as I note here, that if there is a larger donation of artwork, it definitely will be more palatable to the institution if you provide for some cash as well, in order to pay for all the expenses related to insurance, maintenance, display, just storage facilities, all of the other things we have to think about when we're dealing with artwork. Especially and if a work involves, any kind of conservation or, other special maintenance, that is also something to think about when working with an institution. So in terms of the basic processes and documents, every plan is tailored, to that individual or, to that couple. A lot of, people do choose to do estate planning together. Then from a legal side, what you would expect to see is a kind of joint representation agreement, because of the different conflicts that could occur. So that might be just a more logistical thing you would encounter. And then what you would do is the very basic estate planning, you will have a will. A will is a document that is governed by state law. The contents of that will either deal with all of your property outright, and break it up into different categories, such as tangible personal property, real estate. There will be something for residue. You can include some kind of gift, to take care of your pets. There's all sorts of things you can do in that will. You can also provide for your artwork outright that way as well, either naming individual or institutional beneficiaries, or otherwise just outright naming an art executor. So in a will, the person who deals with your estate afterwards is the executor. You could have a co-executor as well. And that person or persons are the ones who will be dealing with the distribution of property and otherwise interfacing on behalf of the estate. When it comes to naming an artwork executor, and this will hold true when I talk about trusts in a second as well, is that there will be a defined role carved out for that person where they can act in conjunction with an executor and might have certain powers reserved to them that are not reserved for the general executor. There's a lot of ways to carve out what that art executor role looks like and what powers they will have. They can have power to sell the art. They can have power to keep it in an entity in some form, donate. They can have specific directions that you provide for them in the will, and they also can be named individually with as by choosing that executor, and you can name a successor artwork executor as well. When it comes to naming that executor or the art executor, you really want to think about conflicts of interest as the key point, especially when we think about, usually the artist cases are the more prominent ones where problems have occurred, specifically with Mark Rothko and Marlborough Gallery, kind of hoarding work and keeping it at a very low price, or the David Smith estate, where artworks, the paint was stripped from certain sculpture because Clement Greenberg decided that they would be better without that paint. So those are the prominent examples. But certainly on the collector side, there's a lot of different interest that could happen as well, where if you named a dealer, and a lot of people, as a collector, those might be your contacts, that you immediately think of would be, who's a dealer who I really trust, or an auction house representative, but that may not be the person who should be handling it because they can't necessarily be impartial, or otherwise, they could, if you do want their voice to be counted, you can certainly name an advisory board and have an advisory board act in conjunction with that artwork executor. So in that sense, any kind of conflict might be mitigated because they do not have the ultimate power and they are one voice among a few voices. So those are the different kinds of permutations that can exist in planning with a will, with artwork. There's many permutations of that, but just some examples there of how it could work. Any kind of initial planning conversation is going to include gathering information to understand the size of the estate. So going back to, is there some kind of tax concern? Are there tax consequences to be worried about? We're going to think about where trusts might be located as well. That can result in different kinds of income tax consequences depending on what state the trust is located in, but also states where there are different levels of contact. Some states like California, it's very easy to trigger some kind of California income tax on a trust, but or in New York, similarly, there are certain requirements to kind of get out of being a New York trust. If you have no New York beneficiaries, no New York trustee, no New York source assets, that can get you out of it if you found yourself in there. So there is all kinds of planning to be done around that. And then there's also the key part, in addition to identifying beneficiaries, the other roles. So as I mentioned, with the executor, those are absolutely, essential to finalizing any document. And usually, that's what will take clients the longest, is to really think about, who is up to this position. And, you can certainly name a successor, you can name multiple successors. There's a flexibility around that. And then similarly, if you do move forward with creating a trust, then you will also have to, you'll name trustees, you'll name successor trustees, you might have a co-trustee, and the structure of those trusts will differ, depending again on what the tax planning looks like that way. Okay. So when we're dealing with artwork, there are more specific items where the estate plan should absolutely address it. I mean, first of all, if you are married, there are different property rules in different jurisdictions. There's community property states like California and Texas, and a couple of others. Most states are, common law states. And the difference is that in a community property state, once you are married, all property is presumed to be owned 50-50 by each of the spouses, and up until the moment of separation, each spouse is default entitled to half of that property. Of course, you can have premarital agreements, you can have a postnup, changing that outcome, but that is the default. And that means that there are also different rules on gifting or selling that may not exist in a common law state. So a common law state means, there is marital property as well, but there isn't necessarily this automatic 50-50 split that occurs. And, there will be different consequences, or maybe lack of consequences, for giving away property that, might otherwise be considered part of the community in a community property state. And then that also means, in estate planning, for estate planning purposes, if you didn't have an estate plan in a community property state, your spouse would be entitled to half of all of your community property. So that means that, if you didn't do anything, your spouse will be getting that portion, and that will include your artwork. So you don't, I say you can't necessarily change that unless you have some kind of other agreement, creating separate property, which you can certainly do, and you absolutely want to consult with an attorney for that, because there are a lot of formalities around doing that to make sure you've really accomplished what it is you're trying to accomplish. In a common law state like New York, there's something called equitable, or there's equitable distribution with a share, or a marital share that can be taken by the widow and the surviving spouse. And that means that if the surviving spouse has not been provided for otherwise with more than 1/3 of the total assets, then that surviving spouse can make an election up to for 1/3 of that estate. So that's something that their surviving spouse will actually have to elect to do. It's not automatic, but that's something on the table as well to consider when creating that estate plan. Another part of the planning, is something called the step up in basis. So I know people probably most encounter this with real estate, but certainly applicable to artwork as well. So this is in the income tax code, where any property that is owned by the decedent at their death gets step up to fair market value as of that date. So that means, let's say you bought a work for $5,000, 10 years ago, and now that $5,000 work is $5 million. And yes, we've seen it happen in a couple of instances. And if you had sold it prior, if it had been sold prior to death, prior to the step up, that would, that gap between the 5,000 and the 5 million would be taxable gain. But if it is sold following that person's death, if the beneficiary decides to sell it, whoever has ownership at that point, decides to go ahead and sell it, that gap is closed. So if the work sells for 5 million, you don't have any taxable gain because you now are benefiting from that step up. So especially with the taxable amounts for estates on the federal side being so high, there have been a lot of kind of changes in planning or more flexible planning to potentially take advantage of the step up, when in the past, really the goal was get assets out of the estate now into some kind of irrevocable trust, which I'll discuss in a minute. So that's really important to think about, and especially with artwork, there's so many fluctuations, and that might be a consideration when deciding whether to make a lifetime gift to somebody or leaving it as an asset at death. Otherwise, your plan, this could be in your will, or if you do have a trust, this can be addressed in your trust, that any expenses for the disposition of the artwork and the care and sale of it should be paid out of the estate. So that way, it will affect tax consequences in a positive way and allow for more deductions. So you really should address that directly if possible. Another part would be to plan for liquidity. There's a lot of people, who are very artwork heavy, but maybe cash poor otherwise. Now there are, all sorts of entities, from the big banks to, smaller boutiques are doing art lending. So, that's something that collectors have taken advantage of as well, is using art loans as a way of unlocking funds, if there are taxes due, if there might be certain bequests to pay otherwise. I think I've seen this, in all sizes of estates as well, where, that's something that just maybe didn't cross somebody's mind otherwise. Liquidity can also be planned for, of course, with life insurance and, have having other forms available like that. But if that hasn't been done, then this is another way to do that. Another aspect, absolutely, is for digital assets. So when I do an estate plan, it's automatically in the will that the executor will be able to access digital assets. I think every state now does have a digital assets law, for allowing the executor to access accounts. And this can include, anything from, your Gmail to your artwork archive account to bank accounts, and social media. So every company, if you look at their terms of service, there will usually be something in there about, what happens on death. And they all have their own processes for dealing with that. And then of course, as we think about people owning, crypto and NFTs, that digital asset access is even more important that way. And you really want to make sure that, first of all, that your passwords, are accessible in some place that that person can find them, and that they have any other pertinent information that they would need, to gain access. I think everybody knows the story of, the person who lost their I think they lost their wallet or they lost their code, and have been searching in a dumpster or in some kind of trash field forever trying to locate it, but to no avail so far. And then another aspect, maybe this is probably more applicable for artists, but sometimes it can apply here as well. If you do have any intellectual property rights in that work, that usually in the case of artwork, that will mean copyright, and you want to address that as well in terms of passing that along to the appropriate person, or if there's any licensing involved that way, to do that. Because otherwise, I think always a good reminder, even if you buy an artwork, you are not buying the copyright. And, the artist does have the right to, display, make images of that work, or otherwise give permission for reproduction. And then in addition, you also, depending on the size of your collection, want to identify different groups of artwork for sale, donation, or any other kind of disposition that you are thinking about, such as holding that artwork in an LLC. So, when if you're able to organize your artwork and identify it easily, otherwise, you really can, just make life easier for your executor or trustee. And, even in your documents, you might say, I want all works on paper to go to LACMA. I want all my photographs to go to the Walker, right? So you can have, you can easily tag things that way, and that's how you can identify artworks, in your estate plan as well. I've worked on trusts where, that's exactly, what it says, just carving out work by medium. And then lastly, as I spoke about before, identifying who that artwork executor and or art trustee might be. So those are absolutely people you want to identify. If you feel that your executor or trustee otherwise will not be able or will not know what to do with the artwork. Okay. So more advanced estate planning, will involve planning with trusts. Basically, a trust is just a way of holding property where you have a trustee holds legal title to the work. You have a beneficiary who holds beneficial title. So the trustee is acting on behalf of the beneficiary. The trustee has what are known as fiduciary duties to the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries can enforce those duties, if they feel that the trustee, is not investing wisely, maybe is not providing an accounting, is otherwise not acting in the best interest of the beneficiaries. Those are all things to address, that get addressed in court all the time or otherwise. A basic trust is a revocable trust. So for tax purposes, that is just a see-through. And it's, if there's no gift that has been made, you can revoke that at any time. You can make changes. You can, change the beneficiaries, change the trustees, do whatever you want. On death, it does become irrevocable. And then the terms of the trust will, apply going forward, including any provisions that might be in there related to further amendments and how those can be made. The trust will also address, who the successor trustees will be, how to remove or replace a trustee, etc. And then there are irrevocable trusts. So those will be used, if there are interests in getting different assets out of the estate. Usually, that it kind of couples in with my next point about lifetime gifting. So that will mean, there's all different, acronyms that, that are out there. I'm sure people have seen, like the GRATs and the GRUTs and the CLATs and the CRUTs and, many more. but that is, there are all sorts of techniques out there to do that. And those all involve, certainly working with an attorney. There are a lot of rules in the estate tax code about what it means to give up control, since that is essentially what you're trying to do, is give up control. Otherwise, if you're just integrating lifetime gifting, there is something called the annual exclusion, which is anybody can give $16,000 or up to $16,000 to as many individuals as they like. Or if you're married, you can do gift splitting, and that can be up to $32,000 then. And after that, that would necessitate filing a gift tax return, which is filed annually. But since that exemption amount, which is so high now, 12 million a person, that any of those lifetime gifts that exceed that $16,000 get counted against that $12 million. So there isn't necessarily any tax due now, but you do want to declare that for sure. And the gift is valued at the time that you're making the gift. So another way people use irrevocable trust is to freeze the value of assets at that time. So if you feel like you have an artwork that is going to appreciate, maybe now is a good time to do planning with it. So that way you aren't using up more of your exemption. And another technique that people use, if you are more charitably inclined, there are charitable trusts, and those trusts can be useful as a way of planning around certain capital gains. If you put an artwork into the trust, if you sell that artwork eventually, when it is in that charitable trust, you can avoid capital gains that way. There are a lot of rules around that. So I would absolutely say you need to work with an attorney to plan around using a charitable trust. And, of course, since it is charitable, depending on the structure, either a charity will receive an income stream at the beginning, known as a charitable lead trust, or there's a charitable remainder trust. So that the charity is the ultimate beneficiary that way. So that's where being charitably inclined comes in. There certainly have been client situations where people forget that part and wonder where the rest of the money is going. And as with anything charity related, at some point it is not yours anymore, and that's where you're getting the tax deduction from, and all the other benefits of doing this. So that is that's part of the deal. And then they're also planning with LLCs. If you are in a taxable estate situation, there's something known as discounting. An appraiser will come in. I own 20% of an LLC that holds $5 million in artwork. That doesn't necessarily translate in a proportional valuation because there are factors known as lack of marketability, lack of control, which decrease that value even further. If you owned a lot of artwork by one person, there's also something called blockage discounts, which really refers to if you were to throw, 30 works by the same artist at auction or otherwise for sale, at one time, of course, you're diluting the market, and you would not get the same results you would as if you release the works on a more gradual basis. So those are other ways to plan, if you're thinking more about taxes. So as my last point now, as far as what can you do right now, being organized is really, really key here. I can't emphasize that enough, especially if you have artworks that were, that could have either pass through, any kind of, Nazi looting situations, or, maybe you have, kind of cultural property issues, if you have any Greek vases or anything else like that, where there may be an issue about whether you can sell it, or if you have ivory or some kind of other material that might involve a prohibition in some way. I think the famous people might know that Rauschenberg case with the bald eagle that Ilyana Sonnabend had owned at the time of her death, and there was a big IRS battle around how to value that because it couldn't be sold otherwise because of that bald eagle. And then otherwise, keeping invoices and any other pertinent information about the artwork together is really key. As far as dealing with any kind of conservation, or if let's say it's performance work. You think of Tino Segal work where you have a contract and that's that, but not even necessarily written, and you have to think about how you might pass that along, the valuation that goes along with that, and otherwise all the record keeping you really want to do, because you never know what will happen going forward at a sale, or not everybody always knows where their artwork really came from, just given the other art market issues we all deal with all the time. So that record keeping, is even more essential. And then lastly, I would say you definitely want to plan for any potential conflicts with family members. That's kind of another number one issue. Every day, I deal with clients, who have some kind of estranged relationship with certain children, or trying to figure out how to write them out of the will without incurring any litigation, and otherwise, there might, there's always sentimental value attached to certain items like artwork, and you just never know what will happen. Once somebody dies, that all hell can break loose basically that way. And there are many situations where people end up spending more money on attorney's fees than they do on the actual value of that item. So those are sort of the pitfalls and areas to address, otherwise when going through this whole process. So with that, I will pass it over to Emily. I certainly have a lot more I can say on all of these topics, but I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. Terrific. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a lot of very useful information. I think it was a really great passing of the baton because Artwork Archive is the platform to help you organize all of those critical provenance documents and everything having to do with your art collection. So I'm now going to share my screen and I'm going to present this. So Artwork Archive has 3 levels of collector accounts, one for smaller collections up to unlimited artworks, unlimited locations, multi-user logins, and then every single account level has the ability to turn on 2-factor authentication, which is imperative for security in this digital age that we all find ourselves in. We also offer location management. We make it very simple to create lists and inventory reports for insurance. And then probably most crucial to this particular topic is we allow you to compile digital copies of all of your provenance documents, every appraisal. You can automatically update the fair market value. And I'm actually going to show you how to do that right now in this demo account that we have set up for this purpose. So if you're not familiar with Artwork Archive, I'll just quickly give you a brief overview. This is the pieces page. It is your home base when you log in. These icons here allow you to choose how to view the inventory in your account. This particular account has 20 pieces in it. And then I can search for pieces in this bar. I can use the filter to search by artist, to search by my locations, and as well as collections, which I'll get into in a minute, and tags, which are entirely unique. and bespoke depending on your particular needs. So once you have uploaded new pieces, and you can do that very simply, either here with just the title is the only required information, or you can bulk upload 20 images at once. You can then start to more granularly curate your inventory or collection into subcategories. And we have two ways to do that are very simple. One is the collections tab here. You see it on the left-hand side. So in this particular account, this collector has two family members, James and Sarah, that they have decided these are the works to be willed to their son, James. This is the piece to be willed to Sarah. This particular account has also gone ahead and put together collections for future museum donations. And this way you can click into the account. You can see only those pieces in that collection. You can quickly edit them on the fly if necessary. And you can also create reports from these collections. Reports is one of the greatest parts about Artwork Archive. If you have experience in the art industry, it's possible you've spent the majority of your life making PDFs, such as I have. But now you don't need to do that. You can quickly go to reports. This is sort of like the main control center. And we have all of these different types of reports that are automatically generated based on your preferred data settings. And then you can also create templates, which means all of your data settings will be saved. So for this particular report template, I'm also going to include location, creation date, medium, price, etc. You can include links to the original image files, which is great for sharing with various partners. And then I can click as many pieces as I want. I can remove things, can generate this report. Anytime you see blue, that means that it is a link. So I can view, download, copy the URL, or share this within the system. Now that this one is done generating, we'll take a look at it. This has been branded out already with Julia Fun Collector Demos personal information, where she lives, all of her contact details, the market value, the purchase value, and all of this information. So as I said before, you always have the option within Artwork Archive to download these reports or share them within the system. And if you share them within the system, those contact records will automatically update with who you've shared what with. So this is very important when dealing with many partners. And I'm just going to click into this artwork as an example. So this artwork was purchased from Christie's. I have them listed as a location with all of their details. I have my appraisal history here. And again, as I mentioned, because this appraiser's name is in blue, I can click on it and I am directed immediately to her contact record, where I can see everything that I've recently shared with her, all the appraisals that she has done for me. And when I upload appraisals to this artwork record, I have the choice to then automatically update the current price or fair market value based on the most recent appraisal. I can also see where my artwork has been. I can add provenance details, exhibition history, publication history. And here is where additional files can be uploaded as PDFs, such as invoices, COAs, certificates of authenticities, and other details. I've had the experience with collectors that they're very excited to show you a piece they've just bought, and then they spend literally minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes scrolling through their images to try to find the correct image. Artwork Archive makes it so that you no longer need to worry about that. You can choose to publish works to the web through your profile. So here is the basic profile setup page. I can choose my public settings here. And most importantly, I can choose to password protect my public profile if I want to. So now if I copy this URL and open it in an incognito window, you'll see here's where I would enter my password so that my pieces aren't open for everyone to see. And in my profile now, Artwork Archive automatically compiles your collections for you based on the collections that you've set up in your inventory. So I can quickly show James what I want to bequeath to him or my attorney. I can send a curator, the works that I want to loan to their museum show. I can also see all of my artists, and I can share this with anyone in my network as long as they have the password. So that's a very useful tool. Some people, however, are only want to show things privately, and that's completely understandable. I can also speak from experience that I have had the same conversation with my father, who's an antiques dealer, in addition to being an attorney, about which pieces from his estate I would like to be willed. We've had the same conversation a dozen times. So with this software, now I can actually go through his collection. I can pick out the pieces that I want, and I can have that list ready digitally, and he can access it from anywhere through his phone, through his computer. If you are more tech savvy and your kids, will say, are very busy, they're world travelers, they're busy at work, busy with their own families, but you have a large, substantial collection and you want to get their thoughts on the pieces they want, but maybe because of COVID or who knows what, they're not able to travel to your home, and sending PDFs back and forth can be difficult. You can create private rooms. And when you create this, you can add all of these data settings, allow downloads. You can allow your viewers to favorite pieces and send messages about them. So you can also password protect this. I'm not going to do that for this particular demonstration, but I'm just going to add all of these pieces. And so now when I share this with myself in this example, I can then go through and I can heart the works that I want. I can add comments about those pieces. All this information is listed here. It is a completely dynamic digital experience. So you can click through, can see various information, and sometimes also about the artists. I can go back to my dashboard. Like I said, I can do all these different things. I can customize the order if I choose. I can share it within the system, which will then automatically update those contacts to see what's been shared with them. And I can make other appropriate documents from those private rooms. So locations is where you can see, okay, my residence or my storage facility, what pieces are currently there, what's the retail value of the pieces currently in that location. Do I need to send a report from this location to my insurer or my attorney or any other shipping logistical partner? Schedule, if you have any dates in your locations about when pieces are moving or being restored, a conservator is coming, anything like that, these you can add reminders to show up in your schedule. And every Monday, Artwork Archive will send you an email with your upcoming deadlines for that week. As I mentioned, Contacts is essentially a fully integrated CRM. So it keeps track of what relation all your contacts are to you, if they're dealers, advisors, insurers, accountants. And then you can also create groups with these various people and quickly see what you've shared with various people, such as Christie's Auction House. If you have reminders, things that you've purchased from these locations and contacts, and if I had an additional file, such as a consignment agreement or a loan agreement, I could upload that here so that everything is together. Income is a really useful tool if you are doing a lot of donations with your estate, as Melissa mentioned. So you can see what donations you've already created. You can create new donations. And if you are actually deaccessioning works through auction house sales or other commercial avenues, you can actually create invoices within the system. And you can also connect this to your PayPal account so that the other party can pay this invoice directly through the web, directly using a credit card. So we've already talked about reports and docs. Just to show you what some of these other reports look like. This is a tear sheet, so it's many pieces on one page. We also have certificates of authenticity that you can actually create for your own pieces if you have a dealer to sign off on it, or someone to just give you that added element of provenance authenticity. Portfolio pages are essentially one image per page. You can put additional information such as provenance notes. And these are generated with the click of a button and based on whatever data settings you choose. Insights is a really fantastic, holistic view of your collection. You can see pieces that you've sold, pieces in your inventory, how much work is in each location that you've set up, such as your mountain chalet or your storage facility. You can see which artists are most represented in your collection, the purchase value versus the current market value. This collector is doing great in that regard. And you can see your purchases and sales over time and the value of your pieces over time. So those are some data visualizations and analytics that not all collectors have access to, but Artwork Archive makes it very easy to zoom out and get that full perspective of your collection. So finally, we have all of these video tutorials that will help you get started with the program. We also offer a 30-day free trial. And I'm just going to quickly go back to the presentation. As Elysian mentioned in the chat and put the link already, the Artwork Archive blog is a terrific resource where we speak with experts such as Melissa on a regular basis to create very useful articles such as estate planning checklists, how to divide your art in a divorce. And also, if you happen to be on the other side of the estate planning formula and you are an institution that is receiving gifts, we also have really great expert insights on the best way to go about that process as well. So with that, I believe we have come to the end of the main webinar. So now we have a few minutes left to answer any questions. And I'll just quickly pop in here to see what questions we have.
Yeah, Emily, I can read off the first one that came in while you were presenting. Great presentation, the two of you, thank you. A question about, is there any tax deduction from loaning artworks to a museum?
So there is not a deduction for that because you haven't given up full control. But I think, on the other hand, if you do decide to make a donation later on, having a work in a museum exhibition will usually enhance the value as well. So, that can bank that for another day.
Great. At what value level is it worthwhile to have an art executor or trustee? 100K, 1 million, 10 million? A question from David.
Sure. I think, if you're having an executor just through your will, you don't necessarily have to pay them. So you can actually create a provision in your will, saying that they're not entitled to compensation. Otherwise, executors, unless the will provides otherwise, which you're certainly allowed to do, there's a commission structure that's attached to that, that's established by state law. So I don't think you necessarily need a minimum amount for that, but it's just, I guess, if there's somebody willing to do it, and if it's kind of, if you think it's worth your while, just given the value of the collection, or value monetary or otherwise, and you are very concerned about the disposition of it, and you don't think that your executor for everything else necessarily makes sense. On the trust side, I think having a trust, it needs to be worthwhile if there's a professional trustee involved. Otherwise, because they'll be taking a fee. But it's definitely, I think, 6 figures for a trust generally to be worthwhile. And another trust advantage is it's helping keep property out of probate, and it has its own default system for transferring property that way.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Melissa. One other question from Q&A, and then there's 2 in chat if we have time. So the last question in Q&A is, if you will artwork or a collection to an institution, can they refuse the gift or the donation? And if so, what happens to the artwork?
Yes, they can certainly refuse. I've certainly seen that happen. Or they cherry pick the work otherwise. And then in that case, usually you'd want to find a backup nonprofit that will accept it.
And actually, one of the articles that is linked in the resource page that Emily shared. So I come from the institution side of things at Artwork Archive, and museums, nonprofits, museums have collecting policies, and if the artwork does not fall into it, they do not have to. Yeah, we see that often. Let's see, Norwood, you had a really great question. Who is best to consult for appraisal? What might be the most unreasonable / misunderstood expectation when leaving a collection to an institution? So a 2-point question: who is best to consult for an appraisal? And what is the most misunderstood expectation when leaving a collection to an institution?
Sure. So I would say on the appraisal side, you absolutely want an independent person to do that. You don't want to have any question around the valuation. Otherwise, since that appraisal will also be establishing, what that fair market value might be on the date of death to get the step up in basis too. You want to make sure, you have somebody who's knows how to deal with, with the particular kind of artwork categories that you own. And if there's an estate tax question involved, then, there's a reasonable expectation that that return was going to be audited, just because that's what happens. And, you really want your appraisal to stand up. On the income tax side, there are very specific rules about who that appraiser can be, but generally speaking, they have to be a third party. And then I was on the museum collection side. I think people just have to expect when making donations, the work might not be on view all the time, and when choosing an institution or institutions, it's good to think about maybe smaller ones, because even if your work, like let's say MoMA wants to accept your work, but it's MoMA, they have lots of artwork, and there's way more artwork than they can ever show. So you might want to choose a smaller institution where they might value the work more, in the sense of wanting to display it, give it more recognition, and you can make more of an impact that way too, by providing exposure to something. Let's say it's a university museum, you're giving students or just other people in the community exposure that they may not have, especially if it's like Binghamton or something like that, where there's not necessarily a ton of other available options in the immediate area.
Yeah. As one who started her art career at her alma mater's art museum, I very much appreciate those donations for the teaching collections. And it's a great point about exposure to the artworks. Smaller collections will most likely be able to display it more and give it its full due. Another question: when opening a dialogue with the museum, RE plans to donate art and objects, who's the best person to speak with, and what might that process look like briefly?
Yeah, so I think if you don't have a relationship otherwise, I think every museum has a development department, and everybody in development, I would say everybody has an art history background. Also, people find themselves in different slots sometimes, and what their career path from that looks like. But I think somebody in development is very well attuned to kind of figure out what might be an appropriate plan with your artwork, and then we'll bring in a curator to get them involved as well, and figure out what makes sense for the museum's collection, what their ability to care for the work might be, and then move towards that board approval process. But usually the curator, they'll have a good sense of what makes sense or not for the collection, and the museum's capacities otherwise, and really will help guide that process.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That's it for questions, Emilie and Melissa. So I'm going to mute myself.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, Melissa. Really appreciate all of your insights and knowledge. And like I said, everyone will get a recording of this presentation, as well as the slides, which have my own contact details and Melissa's, in case you need any further follow-up consultations. So really appreciate all of your attention, and for everyone for being here. And this is Artwork Archive and Dave Pitney signing off from New York City and Denver, Colorado. Thank you so much.
Thank you.